What is going on, everyone? This is another challenge tutorial, and it's about opposition. Those games that you work so hard for, where you're winning with an extra pawn and your opponent doesn't have anything, and you're marching it to promote, but for some reason it's a draw and not a win. That's because you don't understand opposition and you did not control it. We're going to shine some light on this tactic. It's definitely the most important concept in the game of chess. And from here on out, hopefully you'll get a better understanding of it. So you're going to win all the games that you should at the end and not lose the games that you shouldn't from here on out. In this position, it is white to move. We will give you 3 seconds to go ahead and pause the video so you can take as much time as you want to gather as much information about this setup as you can. 1, 2, and 3. The winning move and the only winning move for white is gaining that opposition, and that is by placing your king 1 square forward on d5. Opposition is achieved. There's 1 square between the 2 kings, and now you control it. You can mimic everything black does and maintain that opposition. Black can make no forward progress since you're the one that controls it. If black goes right, you can simply go right. From here, if black goes left or right, you can obviously maintain the opposition and keep mimicking, but that doesn't cover any new ground. Instead, when black sidesteps, you can now flank and step on the square that they just relinquished and gave up. So by putting your king on f6 from here, you did temporarily give up opposition, but now black has to prevent you from grabbing the last square needed to promote your pawn. You now control 3 of the 4 squares the pawn has to march through, and the only move black can do to prevent you from gaining that last one is by going on e8. And by doing that, that allows you to jump back right into place and gain that opposition again. Once black moves left or right, you simply gain that ground again. And after black moves, you can just go ahead and march that pawn straight to promotion. Before we move on to the second problem, we're going to go ahead and back up to the point that we had opposition originally. We do have one loose end, and that is what do we do if the king doesn't sidestep, but it actually backs up and gives us a free row. If it backs up straight, the only move that maintains that opposition is mimicking and going forward. If it goes back and over one to like the e8 square, you have to mimic the exact same movement and go up and right one as well. This maintains the opposition, and therefore, when the king makes his next move, you can relinquish that square that they give up, and you're going to have an easy promoted pawn soon to follow. I was going to throw this in later, but I'll just cover it now real fast. The biggest mistake you can make is when black sidesteps, instead of gaining ground, is to push your pawn, because you're basically going tit for tat. And if you get the rhythm messed up, now that you wasted a turn, black can simply go back to where he was, and now they have the opposition, and you can no longer gain ground. If you go right, he can go right. You go left, he goes left, and you blew it. Don't ever move the pawn unless you can move it twice, because the first movement gives the opposition to them, and the second movement, you can steal it back after they move again. On this next problem, it is very similar to the one prior, only the black king is exactly 1 square to the right. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video if you want to see how that changed the dynamics of the solution for this one. 1, 2, and 3. The only move here is still grabbing opposition, which is simply moving the king to e5 here. And now if black goes left or right, you can simply gain that square that they relinquished. And then once they back up to either e8, you want to grab opposition. Or if they try tricking you, and if they go to d8, you can simply go to f7, and now you cover the last 3 squares to promote your pawn. So no matter what black does, it's too late. You're going to go ahead and promote your pawn, and you're going to have an easy win from there. This next puzzle is almost identical to the last 2, only it's 1 more square pushed to the right. We'll give you 3 more seconds to pause the video if you want to think of the quirks on this setup in comparison to the last 2. 1, 2, and 3. There's actually 3 different forms of opposition. There is direct opposition, which we have covered, and there is diagonal opposition, which is right here. And the last one is distant opposition. So we need to grab diagonal opposition, and that is by putting our king on d5. Diagonal opposition lets you transist to direct opposition because it's 2 squares away, and black doesn't have the ability to grab direct opposition from here. If it moves over to e7, you can grab direct opposition and follow suit just like the last 2 puzzles. Or if it backs up to, let's say, e8, you can grab direct opposition. If it comes to f6, you can go ahead and just put your king on d6, and that's direct opposition. You're just doing it horizontally instead of vertically. So black's move has to go away from the pawn. Once it moves, you can march up the pawn, and once black moves again, you can grab opposition. Or if it goes here, you can grab the last 3 promotion squares, and your pawn will promote shortly after. It is also worth mentioning that from the beginning position, if the black king chooses to go to f8, it is allowed to go to e6, where you don't have opposition in any form, because if black grabs opposition, you have the pawn move to burn, which flip-flops it back, so they have to move, and then you can grab opposition from there. This next position, we're demonstrating that opposition is also for defense, not just offense. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video. 1, 2, and 3. The only move which doesn't lose the game is grabbing opposition with king to f2. Now, obviously, the king can't go too far. He can't march forward. So if he tries marching up the pawn, you have to do a little thinking here, but the best move is going in front of the pawn. And that is because black's king only has 1 square to go to where it protects the pawn. Otherwise, you would conquer it, and it would be a draw. So by them moving to this square, they have opposition. But here's the trick. From here, you want to back up. You do not want to go diagonal. By backing up, if they want to gain ground, they got 2 options. If they march the pawn, you capture. Or if they want to bring their king up, they got to go to a light square. And by doing that, that allows you to regain the opposition. Does not matter what side, you can just follow suit. And then from here, they got 2 options. They can go back and not gain any ground, or they can push forward with the only progressive move. And when they do that, you can simply put your king in front of the pawn again, and black only has 1 move which protects the pawn, and by going there, it's a stalemate. In this next position, we're not going to do any explaining to you, but this is a curveball for you. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video and try to work out what to do here. 1, 2, and 3. The only winning move, believe it or not, is grabbing opposition. That's why it is so important to understand you need to grab opposition. And if we actually turn on the engine, you can look at all the moves. The only move that wins is king to e5, grabbing opposition. And then from here, if black wants to make progress moving towards your pawn, you just want to follow and maintain that opposition. Once they get on the row of your pawn, that's the area where you want to flank when they go left or right. Or of course, if they back up, you just want to follow and maintain that opposition. In this next position, it is white to move again, and we'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video to think this one out. And I'll give you a hint. Sometimes opposition is not the answer if you have other means of winning the game. 1, 2, and 3. Opposition does not do you any good here because you can straight cut off the king by going to e5. And black's best move is d7, and you just want to keep going f6, e8, g7, and the king will dip down to e7. And you've cut the king off enough where now you can go ahead and march up your pawn, and you're going to promote and have an easy peasy game from there. This next position is pretty tricky. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video. 1, 2, and 3. Although there is no square that you can move the king to, which holds opposition, there is a workaround. Thinking logically, putting your king on the only progressive square gaining ground is F3. If you look at black, they have 2 options to move to. If they go to G5, that allows you to grab opposition. And if they go H5, you could just keep marching up the F column and wait for them to turn around. If they keep marching, you keep marching. If they go to the center column, you grab opposition. If they end up turning around, you can just push up the pawn, check them. If they go forward, you grab the horizontal opposition. And if they make the mistake of going backwards, well, the pawn's just basically at the racetrack going for the gold. Here's another defensive puzzle. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video. It's pretty tricky, so take your time. 1, 2, and 3. Well, let's talk about the squares that don't work. Moving up to D2 allows black to grab direct opposition. Going to E2 allows black to grab direct opposition. And any squares to the left on the C column are just too far out and either allow black to grab diagonal opposition and scooch over and cover the promotion squares faster than you can get to, or C1 does the same thing. Even if you try reversing around, it's just too late because black can grab direct opposition instantly. The only square that prevents the loss is E1 because black cannot grab opposition. And if they try to make any forward progress, such as E4, you can grab opposition. D4, you can grab opposition. And if they go over to C4, that's just so far out, you might as well just go and try to take out the pawn and force them to double back. And once they go to either D4, you grab opposition, or D5, and you grab opposition. And just to prove the point that the only scoring one that doesn't lose is, in fact, E1. And there's the analysis there. Only 1-0, King E1. This next puzzle has a couple extra pieces in the mix. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video, so maybe you could figure this all out on your own. 1, 2, and 3. Well, we want to go ahead and reduce material and get rid of the rooks. And that puts the black king into a position where you can outflank it. Going to G3 would be the wrong square because then black could gain opposition. You want to go to E3. Therefore, if the black king moves to the dark square, you just want to push up. And if it goes to the light square, you still want to gain the diagonal opposition. Even though if it goes to G5, you don't gain opposition right away, that is okay because they have limited amount of moves. If they go F6, you gain opposition. And if they go G6, that's when you can go ahead and keep climbing up the E column, gaining more and more squares that your pawn needs to traverse to promotion. We're going to finish off with a nice one. We'll give you 3 seconds to pause the video. Take your time. 1, 2, and 3. We're going to want to trade off rooks first. That comes with check. And then once the black king recaptures, we can analyze this position. Usually when you get a puzzle when there's minor pieces and you know it has to do with opposition, you want to reduce. Once the black king is there, you have to figure it's got to go after your A pawn because otherwise it's going to march and promote. The only way you can access it is through the B4 square, so it's going to take a step forward. We went to diagonal opposition and regular opposition. There is something called distant opposition I named in the beginning. King to C1 is the only move which wins, and that is because it's distant opposition. Black's king is going to march to B4 and grab your pawn. We want to go ahead and grab diagonal opposition because when you have distant opposition, you can use it to traverse to regular opposition or diagonal opposition. It flows from one to another. Any opposition is opposition. If we went to the B2 square, it wouldn't work because after they capture our pawn, we just have no way to get to their pawn before they can protect it. So by going to the D2 square, When they capture ours, we can march up and we're going to take theirs. It doesn't matter if they go to the b4 or b5 square, we're going to capture their pawn, and it's the same motif that we're going to be able to promote our pawn. I have faith that you guys can finish out the puzzle from here. It's similar to the other positions we walked over several times. But we're still getting new people every single day. We're 25% of the way to 4 digits, 1,000, and 1, 2 every day. Welcome aboard, new people. I appreciate you for joining, and feel free to leave any kind of comment. I'm always down to, get back to you, and I appreciate when you guys let me know anything. Anything, even if you don't like the purple or, my voice sounds like a frog, whatever. I don't care. Let me know. I love it. I'm going to go ahead and put in the description a link to the challenge tutorials. If you guys have a certain tactic you want me to make a video of, holler up. Thank you very much. See you on the next.